Welcome, people. I don't know where y'all at. I don't know where you're watching this from, listening to, but my name is Greg Ehill, the Culture Change Agent, and this is episode 2 of the Advance Notice. I'm excited. Today we're going to be talking about redistricting and all that goes around it. I know many of you that are in politics or around politics, you know what redistricting is. But I know 99% of y'all don't know what it is, don't know what it impact, and today we're going to educate you about all that. And we have two distinguished guests. We have Mitchell Brown and Reggie Weaver. Clap it up wherever you at. If you driving, clap it up in your head. If you around, clap it up and get energy. Clap it up, Jeremy. Clap it up, Jeremy. All right, man. So first and foremost, as we jump into the show, Mitchell, introduce yourself to the audience, man. Tell me about yourself, where you're from, all that.
Greetings. My name is Mitchell Brown. I'm counsel at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice in Durham, North Carolina. Originally from Fredericksburg, Virginia, but my family is from Greensboro. I went to A&T, Aggie Pride. To all my Aggies out there, I'm grateful to be here. I'm voting rights counsel, and I work on redistricting issues now on a daily basis. So great to be here, Greg.
Where'd you go to grad school at, man?
So,
and you better shout out your wife, boy.
So shouts out to my wife. I went to NYU School of Law, where I met my wife. We're both civil rights attorneys. She works at the Advancement Project, and grateful to be here.
Reggie, take us away, man.
Yeah, my name is Reggie Weaver. I'm the Special Programs Coordinator for the North Carolina Black Alliance. We're a 501c3. That's a kind of a sister organization to Advance Carolina. And my focus within that is voter education. Specifically over the past year, we've been focusing on redistricting education and economic justice. I'm originally from Mobile, Alabama, and so this whole voting rights piece for me is very personal. I've actually started to take in, anytime I'm asked for like a bio of what I do, I've started to include in that it's continuing the work and the legacy of my ancestors. Voting rights especially. Part of the reason we have that currently as African Americans is because of Selma, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and I have some direct ancestors who were involved in that. So this is very personal. It's part of my lineage, and I'm happy to continue it.
So let's go ahead and jump right in, man. First, before we jump into redistricting and the roles that y'all played over the last year, because of the last couple of years, it's gotten a lot's going on, right? So today's episode, we're going to unpack what redistricting is, how it affects you, and how you can be more knowledgeable, and a couple other things, right? But before we do that, Mitchell, man, we want to kind of have a segment where you brag on yourself, kind of share with the audience, man, not a little bit about your credentials, but what the work you do and how it has impacted others, so we can kind of see through that lens.
Yeah. So through my work at SSJ, we have done a couple things over the past couple of years. The first is we started a program called Community Redistricting Organizations Working for Democracy, or Crowd Academies. And with those Crowd Academies, we've gone throughout the South, from Texas up to Tennessee, over to North Carolina, down to Florida, where we talk with community organizations, community members about redistricting, and we've helped over 1,500 people learn about redistricting and to learn about why it matters to them. And as part of that, we have now filed a case. We filed a case in North Carolina. We filed a case in Texas, and we're following, the redistricting cycles in other states in the South. And we got a win in North Carolina. The North Carolina Supreme Court said that extreme partisan gerrymandering is unlawful in the state of North Carolina, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But we're also in Texas, and we're also fighting for voters in Georgia and Tennessee and in Florida. We are fighting for these voters, and taking that Crowd Academy and that grassroots organizing power and then putting it into practice and using all of our tools. So whether it's litigation, whether it's advocacy, I've written a number of letters to Governor of Louisiana, to legislators in Tennessee. Again, we're in Texas doing the same thing. And so that is the big wins for us, is we are fighting for voters, and people know that when they see SCSJ on the docket, they know that trouble's coming their way. As John Lewis said, we've been getting in good trouble for a very long time. And so, that is the work that we do, and the work that we continue to move forward, and hopefully what we had in North Carolina, the wins we had in North Carolina, we can have in other states as well.
And before you go, question.
Yes, sir.
Mitch, man, I've known you since A&T, man, we're fraternity brothers, always been a brilliant guy, right? And you graduated from New York Law School, and you really could have been doing a lot of other things outside of civil work. So give me a story to encapsulate why you chose to do this work. This work, like you said, when the winds are cool, it's cool, but there's a lot of you go like tomorrow you're gonna be in Caswell County.
Yeah.
Like if you black, you shouldn't be going to Caswell County. Like there's a lot of stuff you're gonna be doing that you do, a lot of grunt work that you will never get. I mean, you'll get your flowers, but it's different than say you could be doing it in a lot of different fields. So give us a story of why you chose to do that type of work.
So actually, that I can directly attribute me being here in North Carolina and doing this work with Marcus Bass.
Okay.
So in 2009, Mary Vaughn Johnson was running for.
Shout out to Mary Vaughn Johnson.
Mary Vaughn Johnson, yes.
Greensboro.
Mary Vaughn Johnson was running for mayor. She was the first black mayor, I think mayor or female mayor, which one?
First black
mayor in Greensboro city history. And she was running for re-election in 2009. And she lost by 900 votes.
Yeah.
And being a student at A&T, I was in student government, I was in the Senate. And I looked at the numbers. And out of 11,000 students, 141 voted on A&T's campus. And Marcus at the time, he had graduated, and he came back and he asked me a question. He said, "Mitch, like you were on student government. What did you do? What did you do to get people out to vote?" And I told him nothing. And from that moment, and that was 13 years ago, from that moment, I vowed to never do nothing again. I vowed to always help people register to vote and to speak out and to help, my fellow community members to go out and vote and do their civic duty. And so, Marcus recruited me to be an intern at A&T for Common Cause North Carolina.
Yep.
And then, I graduated, went to law school, taught for a little bit, went to law school, and decided that coming back to North Carolina as a lawyer, working on the same issues that I worked on as an intern at A&T was very important to me. And now I work with Marcus on a weekly basis. And he actually texted me the other day. I sent him a Facebook message 11 years ago about this work. Yeah. And he's like, "I'm just humbled to be in the game with you still." And I'm humbled to be in the game with you too, Marcus. I talk with Reggie all the time too. And so we're doing this work. And so that's what brought me here in the space is this thought that I want to do something. I don't want to just sit on the sideline and wait for things to happen. When I can use put my hands to the work that God has allowed me to do to do this work. And so that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and we got the show title, Never Do Nothing Again. I like that. And I'm pissed because you ain't give me my flowers. Like, we did the joint at the Pose joint, bro. We lost the whole thing. We changed the coach to A&T with that, talking about Marcus Bad. Greg E. Hill, but I ain't gonna say nothing like that. I don't never get my flowers when I'm supposed to get them. That's all cool. But on that note, and if you see me on my phone, I'm just typing notes, viewers. So if you see my phone, I'm not just texting. I'm on the phone typing notes, all right? So Reggie, man, take us away, man. Unpack. If you to brag on yourself, some of the wins that you've had with your Advanced Carolina or NC Black Alliance, or even before, but just share with the audience that.
Yeah, actually, it's a good segue because really I started this work with Common Cause North Carolina about 5 or 6 years ago as a campus coordinator as well. And so as it relates to redistricting specifically, one of the wins that we had, I started there at a time where redistricting in North Carolina was starting to get more attention, unfortunately bad press. But even then, one of the untold stories for quite a while was the fact that in one of the previous redraws of the maps, the state legislature had actually divided the campus of North Carolina A&T between 2 congressional districts.
Yep.
So part of my work there, in addition to the voting rights, in addition to voter registration, was organizing students to really draw attention to that. And we, over several years, we're constantly drawing attention, just kind of beating the drum around what was going on. And that particular image became a central image in a court case that actually went to the U.S. Supreme Court a few years ago. That Common Cause was the plaintiff in, that really shined the light on the impact. They were still using the language of partisan gerrymandering, but also making a very direct connection that in a state like North Carolina, you cannot separate partisan gerrymandering from racial gerrymandering. There's always going to be a connection between the racial discrimination. So one of the wins from that was that as a result, even as recently as 2 years ago, the state legislature had to redraw that map. North Carolina A&T was unified, which also meant that the city of Greensboro was now reunified. And so in the most recent election, we were able to vote under one single district. As it relates to my work with the Alliance, my work for the past year around redistricting has been primarily through our redistricting education program, which we've called Code Red. We started that and kind of launched that officially in spring of last year. And over the course of 5 or 6 trainings, statewide, we're able to train around 500 people across the state just to do exactly what we're doing right now, help them understand what redistricting is, why it matters, how to get involved. And all of that was lead up to this most recent redistricting process, which happened in the fall. So now, and we'll talk more about kind of where we are now, but what that did was equip that many people across the state to make comment, to be able to analyze maps, and to speak out even now as we move forward with the process.
So on that note, all right, now let's begin to unpack redistricting. So I want to start off with key definitions, right? Because our audience, so let's talk about, and I'm gonna just throw out 3, and then I want you to identify maybe some key definitions so we can kind of ground where we're going to in redistricting.
Yep.
1, legislature, like the different, like what exactly is that? 2, what is gerrymandering? I hear that a lot. What is gerrymandering? And then 3, partisan, like partisan gerrymandering, legislator. I keep hearing that combination of words.
Right.
So, and then if you could just add on a couple key definitions for our viewers and our listeners rather, as they unpack this conversation that they need to know.
Yeah, Reggie, I'll give you start.
I'm actually going to start by adding another definition.
Yes.
Just what is redistricting anyway? So redistricting is the process, as the name implies, of redrawing district maps. That's what it is. And I say that by way of kind of answering your other question, which is gerrymandering. And so gerrymandering is a type of redistricting where you intentionally draw the maps for political advantage. So if you're one of the major parties, you might draw that to favor your particular party. We've also had a history of racial gerrymandering. So, if you are one race or the other, you might draw the maps in a way that's going to advantage one race over another. So that's kind of a basic definition of what gerrymandering is. You want to respond to the pieces around legislature and partisanship?
And so tied with redistricting, so the legislature, which is the General Assembly, and House Representatives and the Senate, like they have a responsibility to redistrict, and that responsibility is given to them from the United States Constitution, but also with the North Carolina Constitution. Like they have the responsibility every 10 years to draw these districts. Why are they drawing these districts? Because each year populations change. So they're either growing, as in North Carolina grew over the last 10 years, according to the 2020 census, where we were able to get an additional congressional seat. And so with the change in population, we want to make sure all the districts are kind of equal so that everybody's vote matters. And so there's a definition called one person, one vote.
Okay.
So in the past, you would have urban centers that have, say you have 1 million people in one area, they would have one representative. But then you go out to the country, in the cow pastures, say you have 1,000 people, they also would have one vote. Now it's a very extreme example.
Yeah.
Very extreme example. But you have one representative for 1,000 people and then one representative for 1 million people. Like that creates an imbalance because that 1,000 people, they have the same voting power in the General Assembly that the 1 million people do. And so those 1 million people's votes are diluted. And what I mean by diluted is that they can't vote with the same power. Say you running in office in that district where you have 100 people, you may only need 51 votes to win. But in the 1 million person district, you need 501,000 votes. Like there's a huge difference in that voting power there. And so what the United States Supreme Court said is that you have to equalize that. And so you have to, if you have 100 people in one district, you have to have 100 people in the other districts or somewhere thereabout. And so, that's what the legislature has to do every 10 years. And as Reggie mentioned, North Carolina has a history of racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering. With racial gerrymandering, you are drawing districts to keep black voters out of the political process and to dilute their voting power. And how you do that is through either something called packing and or cracking. So packing is, putting all these black people into one district in high percentages. In a district, you only need 50% plus one of the vote to win. But sometimes the legislature puts 80%, have a population of 80% black in a district.
What does that mean? So like, I'm trying to, so say for instance, let's say Durham, I'm from Durham, put 80%, how does that hurt or help?
So say Durham has 5 districts. Yeah. I don't really remember. I'd say Durham has 5 districts and say that black voters make up 40% of the population in Durham. Yeah. And out of those 5 districts, if you have 40% of the population, you should have at least 2 districts where as a black voter in a district, you should be able to elect what's known as your candidate of choice.
Yeah.
So you have 2 out of 5 districts, but in what's packing is that the city council who redraws the maps, can put all the black people, draw a district in such a way where you have all the black people in Durham or most of the black people in Durham in one district. And so they only have power in one district to elect their candidate of choice.
So I know y'all gonna get here, but I have to ask, where did this all start? Like, why? How did this even? Because I'm just thinking, because we always say we want people to vote, we want people to vote, and then I remember I was in I don't know what grade I was. It was I think it was the Bush election, and the person won the popular vote, but then they lost, and I was like, hold up, let me unpack that as a student. The guy won by a couple million votes.
He did.
But still lost. It looked like by a landslide to a certain degree. It was like a couple states. So that's why I'm always confused.
Yeah.
So first of all, why did they have it like that? Why did they just go from just not popular vote? And then how is it all nuanced? I know that's a wide question, but I mean, that's for regular people, that's what you think. Like, okay, go vote. You vote in power, you get the popular vote, and you still lose. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. Well, that's a little different. So that's.
I know that's a little different, but I had to ask big.
So the short answer to your question is that's the Electoral College. So the Electoral College is a group of people from every state that go to a convention and cast a vote for the president. That's the Electoral College. Like in the United States, we don't have what we call a direct democracy, where your vote directly goes to an elected official or to the president.
We didn't learn that in school. We just learned we got a democracy.
Exactly right. That's the problem. That's the problem is that we throw the word democracy around, but we don't define it. So we don't have a direct democracy where your vote for the president is direct. Like you directly vote for the president. Mm-hmm. We have a representative democracy where you vote and the popular vote for your state, depending on the political rules, goes to these delegates, and these delegates cast their vote, and you have to get 270 to win the presidency. That's the difference between direct democracy, where like my vote, you win the popular vote, you win. Mm-hmm. And that's how Bush v. Gore, that's how it happened. That's how Bush won. He won the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote. And so there's been some changes, some conversations about changing the Electoral College that are not really going anywhere, but something that happens. So.
But as far as gerrymandering itself, I mean, this has been happening almost since the founding of the nation. Some version of gerrymandering. The term actually comes from there was, and I forget the exact year, but there was a redraw of a map in Massachusetts.
Okay.
The governor at the time was named Elbridge Gerry, Gery. Mm-hmm. And so the gerrymandering actually comes from his name. So he signed into law a map that the legislature had drawn that drew a district that this cartoonist said looked like a salamander. So they added Gary to Mander, so from salamander. That's how we get the word. Mm-hmm. But it's been happening since the 1700s, 1800s. Gerrymandering as a concept, as a fact. Where it's really gotten worse for us, I mean, especially for black folks, has been really since we were emancipated from slavery. During the Reconstruction era, throughout the country, black folks, for the first time, held political power, were able to elect record numbers of elected officials from within the black communities. And shortly thereafter, very swiftly there was a backlash from white legislatures, especially in the South. And so issues like you were just describing around packing and cracking, we see all these black people are electing all these folks. We can't have that. So we're going to start packing black voters into 1 or 2 districts, cracking power. And so it's been kind of this backlash to people who were not intended to be participants in democracy suddenly come into power. Mm-hmm. And over history, we've seen that happen in the United States kind of in different ways at different times, always in response to particularly black people and people of color gaining political power.
Yeah. And the Fourth Circuit, so United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in 2016 said that the legislature targeted black voters with surgical precision when they tried to pass the voter ID law in 2016, and so that surgical precision language has made its way into other areas such as redistricting, where the legislature is carving up black voters in Northeast North Carolina, down in the Sand Hills, like across North Carolina. They are carving up in Guilford County. They're carving up black voters to dilute the voting power of black voters so that they don't have control Now they do it under the lens of partisan gerrymandering. They do it under the lens that we're gerrymandering against Democratic voters. Well, history has shown that black voters are Democratic voters.
Yeah.
And so that's the easy way to say, hey, we're not racially gerrymandering here. We're not trying to hurt black people. We're trying to hurt the Democrats. You know, but this year, you know, and this is why this is very important that this case happened, is that the North Carolina Supreme Court outlawed extreme partisan gerrymandering. You can no longer do that. You can no longer gerrymander for Democratic or Republican purposes, or for against black people or Latinx people. Like, you can't do that anymore. And so that their cover was blown. You know, so no longer can we just slice up people. Like, we have to think twice before we do it.
So on that note, because honestly, I'm gonna be honest, this is insidious. Like, what's going on.
Absolutely.
And what's more insidious about it is just like you unpacking the popular vote, direct democracy, etc. This is happening under the guise where black folk, a lot of us only know really is to go vote.
Yes.
That's what we know. That's our best. That's what we know. But then there's so much other stuff going. That's why we have organizations like yourself, organizations like Advanced Carolina, ANC Black Alliance to do on our behalf. But now we reached, I think, probably a critical crossroads in our era where now college students, non-college students, everyone should know about what's going on and how to do it in a certain sense. So now let's jump into the maps were drawn, the maps were trash. How do we go about, what was the decision to then fight it in court? And then what was the takeaway? So where do we stand now?
So the reason why, there's
and unpack why I said trash too. Why is it so bad?
So I'll start out with why these maps are trash to begin with, or unconstitutional, as the North Carolina Supreme Court found them to be, is that the Republican legislature, so the House of Representatives and the Senate in North Carolina, they drew these maps, and these maps were very, very partisan in nature, both at the congressional level, and let me back up there, that's something that's really important. The legislature draws the maps for the House of Representatives, for the Senate, but also for the congressional districts in North Carolina.
So you're talking state and federal.
State and federal.
Okay.
You know, and then we'll get to local in a minute. But state and federal, the legislature has a lot of power. Like, flat out, they have a lot of power. And so they drew these maps that, you know, were very partisan in nature and favored Republicans over Democrats. Again, remember what I just said, that black voters are Democratic voters. You know, but they said, the Republican legislature said, we're drawing these maps to gerrymander Democrats, and we're allowed to do that. Well, the North Carolina Supreme Court said, no, you're not. You're not allowed to draw these maps to favor yourselves as Republicans. And just to give you an example of that, the congressional map was a very, very pointed example of how the Republicans gerrymandered these maps. So North Carolina has 14 congressional districts.
Okay.
11 of them were strong Republican districts.
11 out of 14.
11 out of 14.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that is that in those districts, the Republican vote share was probably between 56 to 60%.
Okay. Yeah.
And then in the other three districts, you had a Democratic vote share that was probably 60, 70%.
Okay.
Because they packed black voters into these districts.
Just, I think, to that point, that one thing that's just kind of important to note is that in a state like North Carolina, though, in terms of how voters actually vote, we're roughly 50-50. Actually, like it's becoming more like a third now in terms of Republican, Democrat, Independent. So all that to say, there's no way, if you look at how voters actually vote, that you get a map that's 11-3.
That's what always struck me. It's like, it sounds like we're almost even, but then how could it be 11 out of 14?
Yep. And so the North Carolina Supreme Court trashed it, and were found unconstitutional. Got to use my legal language, unconstitutional. Then the legislature had to redraw it. And just last week, the Wake County Superior Court found that, in particular, the congressional map that they redrew. So they drew it the first time. The Supreme Court said, this is messed up. You can't do this. Redraw it again. They redrew it again, and they continued to mess it up. Like I think they made it 9-5. You know, and the Superior Court said, no, this is still not the answer. You know, you still are using your partisan data to preference Republican voters, even though, as Reggie said, we're half and half in this state, or a third. That is true, you know. But as far as actual voting, it's like half and half. And so they had what's called a special master, which is like basically a third party that draws a map. They said
And
legislature, you
who
can't
is
do
this
it. Right.
third party?
So that's
Who's the
another.
mysterious third party?
So this mysterious third party, it's not so mysterious, but they were a group of law professors.
Law professors.
Well, one's a law professor. The other two, I think, were just general regular. Like,
Are they white or black? All white, all black? The mix?
I think they're all white. I believe.
Okay. All white people drawing maps that preference all white. Okay,
I think
cool.
I think they're all white. I believe. But don't quote me on that. I think they're all white there. But I think the goal of this third party was to like they have no political interest in it.
Oh, they don't.
They don't have any political interest.
This guy, they skim interest, but okay, continue. My bad. I don't put you on the spot. This is great.
No, you get. I ain't gonna comment on that part. I'm not comment on that part. But they are a neutral third party, or supposed to be neutral.
Uh-huh.
Let's put it this way: they're not the legislature.
Yeah.
Like they don't have to run in these districts that they are creating, and so they drew this map. They drew this congressional map that is closer to 7-7, so close to an even split. But the one thing that we failed to talk about is the state house map and the state senate map, which was drawn to dilute the black voting power in Northeast North Carolina. Mm-hmm. If anybody knows anything about North Carolina, black folks live in Northeast North Carolina. So Pitt County, Halifax, I went to Halifax. Pasquotank, up there in Elizabeth City area, like black folks live over there. Because you look at the history of that, that's where the plantations were during slavery times, and so they just stayed there in Eastern North Carolina. And throughout history, Eastern North Carolina has always been a target for voter suppression, whether it be through redistricting, through voter ID laws, through poll taxes, literacy tests, you name it. Eastern North Carolina was the target. And in fact, under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, 40 counties, I think it's 40 counties in North Carolina were under preclearance. And what I mean by preclearance is that before they could pass a law, they had to go to the United States Attorney General to make sure that they weren't suppressing the black vote.
Wow.
And so 40 counties in North Carolina had to go through this federal government process. Those 40 counties were in Eastern North Carolina. Like Western North Carolina, they didn't really have any issues, but not many black people live in Western North Carolina on average. And so, like, you look at Eastern North Carolina in the state house and state senate map, the legislature carved them up. And so they had to redraw those as well. And they redrew those, and the Superior Court said, this is fine. They'll do. We're still in the process of seeing whether or not those are actually good for black voters. So it's still an ongoing process. That's one thing that I want to note is that the districts may be 90% set right now, but doesn't mean they can't change in the future. So I just want to leave that out there.
So let's begin to unpack as we shift towards the end of this segment. But let's unpack specifically why these maps and how these maps affect our North Carolinians. Right. Let's put as specifically as we can. So say for instance you're talking to your mother, your cousin, or some students at a middle school or high school, and they're saying, okay, Mitchell, Reggie, y'all talking about these maps and redistricting, y'all educating me on some things, but why does this affect me?
Yep. Yeah. Well, at a minimum, as we've been talking about, at a minimum, it's going to affect who we are able to elect. So, that's kind of the first most important point is that it impacts who we're able to elect. And why does that matter? Because all of us as people who live in this state, in our county, in our city, we all on a daily basis are facing various issues. Right now we're still going through a pandemic. We've got COVID-19 going on. I know that in the previous conversation with Attorney Yolanda Taylor, you all talked about housing insecurity, food insecurity. We constantly, especially as black folks, are having debates and conversations around policing, police brutality. You name the issue.
Utility, oh my God, utility bills are getting out of control.
You name the issue, somebody who's elected is going to have a role in how that policy gets shaped and how that impacts us. So redistricting not only impacts who gets elected, but there's the broader impact of the reason we elect these people is to create laws, to create policies that, if they're doing the right thing, are going to improve our lives. If we're voting on maps that are not fair, our ability to do that is hindered.
And one thing I want to highlight what Reggie just said is that we have to elect people, And there's a common misconception that black voters want to elect black candidates. Now that is in large part true. But as my dad always says, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, and so we want representation that looks like us, one that's important, but also is responsive to the needs of the community. Right. So if you are a white person, you're a Latinx person, whatever race, ethnicity, or creed you are you responsive to the needs of your community that you serve? And if you are, great. If not, it's time for you to go. And so that's part of this redistricting process, is that it's not just about getting more black folks in the Senate or more black folks in the House or in Congress. It's about having representatives who are going to be responsive to the needs of my community. So we talk about it on the congressional level, those federal dollars. Like, are those federal dollars going to funnel down to North Carolina? And at the state level, when you have the House of Representatives and the Senate, are those dollars from the federal government going to funnel down to the local level? Because even there's local redistricting as well. Your school boards, your county commissioners, your city council, those are also from districts for the most part. And so those dollars that come from the state, are the local city councils going to fund, schools in an equitable manner? Are you going to fund white schools more than black schools? Like, those are the decisions that redistricting and the trickle down effect that redistricting has. I used the financial example, but also goes into policies. Like, use COVID-19 as an example. Like, if you live in one part of town where you don't have to wear masks and you don't have vaccination requirements, etc., like, is that going to harm your community? Who you elect, they have different takes on that. You have some folks that say,
say, like New Orleans.
Like
so
New Orleans,
she had a little badge.
She had a little badge, exactly. You have different realities, and so you want a government that's responsive to who you are.
Question. Oftentimes I think about it, and I step away from my political hat and I put on my regular hat. And us all being collegiate graduates, some of us master's degrees, attorneys, and things of that nature. And we look at politics, and majority of the black people that are, and this is, don't tongue in cheek me with the statistics, but it would seem to be the majority of the black people that are elected, college educated, some PhDs, master's degrees, etc. And then a lot of the programming that we have, or that we're fighting for, a lot of times, it usually is to help lower income communities, correct? And there's sometimes I can see, like, how do we hold accountable where sometimes the people that are in power that are black, they're not the lower income. They're not the ones that they're like, I see it all the time. Unfortunately, they're the ones that they kids are in private schools, or the kids are going to the schools with most funding. But then they're there to serve those that not there to serve, but one of the main constituents that really need a lot of stuff, i.e. street lights on bus things. They don't ride the bus. So i.e. utility. They're not worried about utility bills like that. It's a nuisance when it's hot, but they're not worried about that. They're not worried about my kid not having 30 people in the classroom because they say, oh, my child ain't going to that school. We're going to talk X, Y, and Z. And now I got in the city council. Now I can talk to X, Y, and Z. So my child ain't going to that school. So how do we as a black community, and I don't know if y'all have this answer, or how do we ask the right question to see how can we really bridge that gap, or is a gap that's ever going to be bridged? As far as being able to, because it sounds like, because I've seen all the time, we'll say, hey, no, let's elect people that are in that community to serve. But then sometimes you go, and the political game is different. And they get boxed out in a political game. And then sometimes they're maybe not as knowledgeable about certain things. So then they may not, it's really weird. And so what do y'all have to say to that? I know that's a putting you on the spot, and it's a weird situation.
No. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head that many representatives, black or otherwise, don't necessarily represent the interest of their community because they don't live that life, And I think it's important for people to come from the community and to build the grassroots level, but there has to be a policy behind that to allow them to do that. Like it takes money to run for office. And so if you come from a impoverished background, or I'm not saying use the word impoverished, a lower income background, you can't build up, the donations that you need to run for office when the person across town is raising $1 million and all you can raise is $1,000. Like there's no equity there. And so like that's one thing, that's one way we can change that. But also our elected officials, again, we have to be in contact with the community and understand what the community needs, and not sit in the quote unquote ivory tower, and just look down on the people. It's like you have to talk with them, and not just for a political gain. Like not when it's election season, you got to talk to them throughout. And that's one thing that's important. But I think it just harkens back to we need responsive elected officials. Like you have to be responsive to the community, because if you're not, it's time for you to go.
And I was just going to add, I think just on the community side of that, showing up. So, whether it's city council, county commission, school board, whatever level, anytime, if possible, if there's a meeting, if there's a town hall, any opportunities you have to really directly engage the elected officials, show up. It's been more difficult now, during this COVID era, but at least in-person meetings, but just anytime you learn that there's an opportunity to show up. And I also think just recognizing the challenges that Mitch named, there is still, I think about, some of the church ladies in the community, the folks who kind of know some of these, maybe the younger generation that's coming up, see the skills and the talent in them. I think that there is a way in which we can begin to kind of nurture the leaders we would like to see. And so, we've got those challenges. A lot of times money is a big piece of that, but I also think that there are people who have those talents, who have the leadership skills, who would be good representatives, who just haven't been encouraged and who haven't been told that we need you and haven't recognized the need. So I think kind of at that community level, beginning to nurture that.
Absolutely. And then let's do our last two questions. And this one's very, very serious. And I know many of you know voter apathy in the Black community is at an all-time high. Political apathy in the Black community is at an all-time high. There's well-engaged people that are community leaders that are in this group, that have parents, that have children that have now begun to opt out the political process in general. And I know y'all are on the fighting every single day for us. So one, how do you mentally deal with the fact sometimes where it's like you're fighting for something and now people, and I'm talking about people that really, you need to be right here with you on the journey. Imagine a war, y'all going to war, and now they're like, man, I ain't even with it.
Yeah.
And then a part of you probably in the back of your head, like, shoot, if I was looking at it from the outside too, I might not be in it too. So how do you, person that's fighting on the front line for people that some of them now are like, man, honestly, we're not even on politics. I'm not voting no more.
Yep. To me, so in terms of kind of, I'm going to answer first in terms of where I draw strength and hope, and that's why I started with that conversation about at least my personal background. There was a time in this country where we didn't even think we were going to have this right to vote, and yet I have seen enough times over history where we won when we fought. And so I think that just keeps me encouraged. And so part of what we also try to do, and one of the reasons that our kind of Code Red trainings were I think so powerful for a lot of people, is that we also showed in those trainings times where we have won successes around redistricting, especially at the local level. And so we just try to keep people encouraged that we've kind of seen this before, and where it seems kind of dark right now, we've been here. It's not the first time. And we always have shown that when we do show up, we can turn things around. I think you raise a good question, and I think it gets to kind of a shift in my thinking, because I think you're right. We often hear, especially in the Black community, because we have fought so hard historically for voting rights, a lot of time the conversation goes like this: you need to go vote because our ancestors did this for you, which is true.
Yes.
Except what they were really fighting for, I think, was liberation, which is a bigger game than just voting. Voting is a tactic in that. And so just like, and we, today we focused on redistricting, but in terms of voter suppression and taking the Black vote, redistricting is just one tactic in the whole arsenal. They've also been using voter ID, closing polling locations. It's one tactic. So for me, voting as a counter. It's just one tactic, but it's a necessary tactic. I think of it like a fist fight. You know, you just gonna use one fist in a fist fight, or you're gonna use everything at your disposal. So that's the way I think of it. So I understand it, but at the same time, I recognize that it's still a necessary tactic, but it's not the only step that's needed.
Yeah. And I mean, how I deal with that, and I agree with everything Reggie just said, you know, as I think of the statement, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? You know, and we are the middle people. We are the people in the middle of David and Goliath. You know, like we, sometimes we have a lot of stones, and sometimes we got one, you know, but we only need one stone sometimes to kill Goliath. And so, like, we have to do it, because I think about all the plaintiffs that served in all the cases that we've ever filed. I'm thinking about, you know, the older Black generation in Halifax County, for example. Like, I had never been to Halifax County. I drove up there. And we met at the Ruby Tuesday, and we broke bread at Ruby Tuesday. You know, and they said, Mitchell, thank you for representing us, and thank you for speaking out. Like, we've been doing this for a very long time, and it's good to see young people like yourself doing this work. Like, I think about them. You know, I think about them every day, you know, and that if I don't do this work, and we don't do this work, then are we letting them down? And it's not out of, like, I owe them something, you know. I owe them a debt of gratitude for the work they've done to allow us to get to this point. We stand on the shoulders of giants, but at the same time, I do it for them. You know, I have the skill set and the ability and the capacity and the time and the resources to actually do this work, you know, and to be good at it. And that's not to brag, but that's like, we get results. We get results, and I think that is important for the community, because they see we get results, and they don't lose hope. Because when you got beaten down, and you keep on losing, then you give up hope, and that's where voter apathy comes into play. But you get that one win, like, all right, there's a little bit of hope. You know, then you get another win. It's like, okay, we on something now. You know, and you know, just little nuggets of hope and good faith, you know, allow us to continue to fight. And as Reggie said, like, this happened before. Nothing new is under the sun. You know, and so we won before, we'll win again.
And it kind of reminds me of the movie 300, where end of the day, because I watch it a lot, and history buffs do not be in the comments like, yo, you're really in 300. Like, I get it. I'm just going off the movie right now, right? But in 300, there was more other men that was there, right? But the leader, Leonidas, he didn't focus on those that didn't come to the fight. He wasn't saying, hey man, y'all ain't coming to the fight. Y'all see us getting ready? No, he said, we got 300. We're gonna go, and we're gonna do it for whoever you're from. Even for the men that said they not coming. Even for the people that say they not voting. People say they don't care about politics, whatever, because y'all realize when y'all go in these, a lot of times we go in these smaller counties, that's where you really see it.
Absolutely.
And I had to learn too, because I mean, I think Durham, I think y'all New York, Miami, because I've had the ability and the privilege to be able to go to these places, right? So I think Durham is like, it's a city, but it ain't like Miami, it ain't like this. But some people, they're coming from Halifax, Pakistan, Durham is Miami. Durham is New York. And in those places, those are the people a lot of times, like you said, that are most affected by the voting and political things. And like I said, man, so I want to thank y'all for the work that y'all do. So let's close out like this, man. Last statements from each of y'all, just from this conversation, you know, what you want to share with the audience, and then where they can reach you at or find you at for more questions.
You know, I think for me, just final statement is that as Mitch and I think both have named, the map's where we are, far from perfect, but it's the first time in a long time in North Carolina that we have an opportunity to vote on maps that are at least close to fair. And so I think that it's still going to be important. Part of what this means now is the next step is that it enables us now to actually move toward these midterm elections and the general elections in the fall. It's going to be really important that we participate so that we can finally try to begin to focus on some of these other issues that are impacting us on a daily basis.
And my final thought is the fight continues. Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I like to add a second phrase, but we have to bend it. We got to get to bending. And I think step by step, as we continue to bend that moral arc, you know, it allows us to get towards justice. And so we can't give up the fight. We can't lose hope. You know, and we talked about, vote because our ancestors did it. I'm gonna say vote and get involved, because if we don't, then our ancestors' fights were for nothing. And so we need to continue to bend the moral arc. And I can be reached at Mitchell Brown at scsj.org, or just type in scsj.org and look me up on the website there.
And they got a lot of resources online.
Yeah.
And real quick, what does your organization do in general, and what kind of research you have? And then after he goes, you close out where, because I know you have some trainings coming up, and kind of showcase the organization and how they can kind of get involved.
So SCSJ, or the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, we have a lot of resources around voting, and also criminal justice resources. So we do a lot of voting rights work. We do a lot of justice, we call them justice systems reform work, and we're starting our burgeoning environmental justice work as well. So we do all three of those. Those are three main areas. And we have a lot of resources at the website, again, at scsj.org.
Again, my name is Reggie Weaver. If you want to contact me, you can reach me, Reggie at ncblackalliance.org. And as Greg just alluded, so for the past year, we've been doing a series of trainings around redistricting. Now that we're at the point where the maps have actually been drawn, we're going to continue that training. First one coming up this Thursday, March 3rd, where we're talking about redistricting and the 2022 election. So like what do the maps look like now, and what are the implications? That'll be followed by a few other trainings where we're focusing a little bit more around exactly what you've been asking. What are the kind of the issues that are on the ballot? How do the maps impact those issues? So you can find more information about that, both from our previous trainings and information about the upcoming trainings at ncblackalliance.org/code-red.
I hope y'all enjoyed this episode of Advanced Note. It's episode 2 of season 2. First of all, thank y'all guests, man, from the bottom of my heart for giving y'all time, man. Mitch just flew down for this. Reggie drove 1 hour again to shoot another episode about redistricting. So I appreciate you, Reggie, for that, man. Hope y'all got something from it. And check us out for episode 3 coming next month, all right? Love y'all from your boy, Greg Ehill, the Culture Change Agent, and we out.